Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Bonitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So continuing Canto 10, Chapter 46, and there are two texts for today, text 29 and text 30. So we'll chant text 29 together. Tayorutam Bhagavan my computer keeps changing things. Krishne Nanda Yasodaya Bhikshanu Nagam Paramam Nandam Ahodavo Mudam Tayorutam Bhagavati Krishna Nanda Yasodayo Dikshanuragam Paramam Nandam Ahodavo Mudam Tayoritam Bhagavati Krishna Nanda Yasodayo Dikshanuragam Paramam Nandam Ahodavo Mudam. Please chant. Tayoritam Bhagavati Krishna Nanda Yasodayo Dikshanuragam Paramam Nandam Ahodavo Nanda Mudam. Tayoritam Bhagavati Krishna Nanda Yasodayo Ishanuragam Paramam Nandam Ahodavo Mudam. Tayoritam Bhagavati Krishna Nanda Yasodayo Dikshanuragam Paramam Nandam Ahodavo Mudam. And the word for word, Tayor, of the two of them, Itam, like this, Bhagavata, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, Lord Krishna, Nanda, Yasodayo, of Nanda and Yasoda, Viksha, clearly seen, Anuragam, the loving attraction, Paramam, supreme, Nandam, to Nanda, Aha, spoke, Uddhava, Muda, with joy. And the translation for text 29. Uddhava then joyfully addressed Nanda Maharaj, having clearly seen the supreme loving attraction he and Yasoda felt for Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, purport by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. If Uddhava had seen Nanda and Yasoda actually suffering, he would not have reacted with joy. But, in fact, all emotions on the spiritual platform are transcendental bliss. The so-called anguish of the pure devotees is another form of loving ecstasy. This was clearly seen by Uddhava, and thus he spoke as follows. So text 30. Shri Uddhava Uvacha Yuvam Slagyatamau Nunam Dehinam Iha Manada Yat Pratmatir Dirai. And the translation for text 30. Sri Uddhava said, O respectful Nanda, certainly you and Mother Yasoda are the most praiseworthy persons in the entire world, since you have developed such a loving attitude towards Lord Narayan, the spiritual master of all living beings. Purport. Understanding Nanda's mood as expressed by his statement, Manye Krishnam Charamam Cha Prapta Iha Surotamata. I think Krishna and Rama must be two exalted demigods. Uddhava here referred to Krishna as Lord Narayan. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Gadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamlam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sai Krishna Chaitanya Devam Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagakate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapsa Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriya Panchakalpatarubhya Kripa Sindhubhya Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimad Padaswami iti namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll just read the translation once again for text 29. Uddhava then joyfully addressed Nanda Maharaj, having clearly seen the supreme loving attraction he and Yasoda felt for Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Uddhava, he comes to make a comparison between the love for Krishna that is seen in Nanda and Yasoda, and the love that's there for Krishna that's seen in Vasudeva and Devaki. Now, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he's commenting on these two verses, and he comments that Uddhava clearly observed, because he's present, so the word that was used was the Vikshya, the intense loving attraction for Krishna of Nanda and Yasoda. So he's personally witnessing it. Now, there's some characteristics of those who are eligible for elevation to the transcendental position, because here we're looking at personalities that are in the topmost position. So if we backtrack, so the characteristics of those who are eligible for elevation to the transcendental position, meaning that they're able to accept devotional service and gradually rise to this position of knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in its most purified form. So such characteristics are having passed through the regulative principles of devotion or religion, having acted piously, and having conquered sinful reactions. So this is given, these characteristics are what make one eligible for this kind of elevation into a transcendental position of purified love for Lord Krishna. is actually stated by Krishna himself in Bhagavad Gita in 7:29. And these persons that develop these characteristics, acting piously, following the regular principles of religion, going through their sinful reactions and overcoming those reactions through the pious activities, they make up one category of persons absorbed in Krishna consciousness. Means they're cultivating devotional service. Now there's a second group of devotees who are already at that perfectional stage of devotional service. And this categorization is given in Nectar of Devotion, Srila Prabhupada's breakdown of Srila Rupa Goswami's Nectar of Devotion. And so devotees in the first category, those that are cultivating devotional service and who've reached this stage of actually being attracted to Krishna, but they're still not free of that kind of material impulse. There's still some blockages. They're described as being intermediate devotees. So it's already having advanced quite a fair amount on the devotional path. But there's some blockage, some material impulse. And there's again a definition that's given of devotees that are at this intermediate stage of devotion. So this is the definition. An intermediate or second-class devotee, the Madhyama Adhikari, he offers his love to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is a sincere friend to all the devotees of the Lord. He shows mercy to ignorant people who are innocent and disregards those who are envious to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, this definition is given in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam for the devotees cultivating out of the two categories, those that are cultivating devotional service and are in this intermediate stage. So now, one can just notice the fact that they themselves practice some portion with who they're distributing knowledge of Krishna consciousness to. And that portion is that they're actually showing indifference to persons that clearly show some animosity towards any statements, any allusions to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is actually quite an intelligent position on the part of an intermediate devotee, because they understand that they themselves may actually experience some hostility towards a person who's actually not very receptive to the messages of Krishna consciousness. And so it's intelligent. They're actually preventing hostility arising in themselves and hostility arising in those that are categorized as being envious of the Supreme Personality of God. They are not actually open to the messages of Krishna consciousness. And which is quite natural, because if you go back, there's certain characteristics that need to be fulfilled for one even to be taking or being willing to accept devotional service. So one of them was having acted very piously and having overcome quite a lot of sinful reactions. So many persons have not come to that point yet. So hence the hostility. So now when a devotee is shedding tears, because we're hearing about Yashoda shedding tears, but she's not in the category of persons who are cultivating devotion, but say persons who are cultivating devotion, but they're actually shedding some tears when they're hearing the pastimes of Lord Krishna. This is a sign, actually, that this is how it's put in the Nectar of Devotion. So I'm quoting the direct words of Srila Prabhupada. The blazing fire of material existence will be extinguished by such watering. So the external expression, actually feeling emotion in hearing the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, means that all the suffering that generally is going on in one's residing on a material plane, meaning, the suffering of one's own mind, the suffering caused by others, the suffering coming from, natural causes, all of that blazing fire of suffering, it's actually getting extinguished just by the fact that emotion is arising in hearing about the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and some tears are coming. So those tears are actually extinguishing this blazing fire of material existence, all that suffering. Those are Srila Prabhupada's words. Now, the perfectional stage of devotion to Lord Krishna is characterized by the devotee never tiring of executing devotional service, constantly relishing devotional mellows in the relationship with Lord Krishna. So the internal life is very much alive. It's actually an exchange of emotions with Lord Krishna, and they never tire of executing devotional service. I mean, it's interesting, when one is in an institutional setting and there's many persons that come and perform service, one can see that it's not an easy thing. Persons can sustain for some time and then they fall away. Sustain for some time and fall away. But if one's actually in that category of being in the perfectional state of devotion, there's no tiring. There's no falling away. It's like consistently being able to perform devotional service. And just if one actually attempts to perform service, one soon discovers it's not such an easy thing to consistently be able to do it. So the reason, of course, is because the heart is so purified and the relationship with Krishna is established. So there's actually a sort of loving exchange going on through the action of devotional service, and an internal mood of reciprocation is going on, and that sustains the devotional service or the acts performed as service to Lord Krishna. So such a stage, this perfectional stage of devotional service, it can also be achieved by the gradual progress in devotional service. Or else, it can be achieved by the causeless mercy of Lord Krishna. So there's an example of this causeless mercy of Lord Krishna in the there's a story of the wives of the Brahmanas in Krishna book, and in that recount, these wives of the Brahmanas, the Brahmanas being engaged in some ritualistic sacrifices, and their wives being sort of in the background, and the cowherd boys are sent by Krishna to request some food from the Brahmanas engaged in their ritualistic sacrifice, and the Brahmanas, shoo the boys away. But the response of their wives is quite different. And this is how the response of their wives is. I'm quoting from Srimad Bhagavatam. Taking along in large vessels the 4 kinds of food, full of tastes and aromas, all the ladies went forth to meet their beloved, just as rivers flow towards the sea. So their response was, on the emotional plane. Nothing could stop them. So this was so since they had heard descriptions of Lord Krishna, and they were enchanted by those descriptions. So there's the following description of how they were responding. So I'm quoting again from Srimad Bhagavatam. Indeed, their minds were always absorbed in him. Through the aperture of their eyes, they now forced him to enter within their hearts. And then they embraced him within for a long time. In this way, they gave up the pain of separation from him, just as sages give up the anxiety of false ego by embracing their innermost consciousness. So this is given in the 20th chapter of the same canto that we're on at the present time. So there's been an internal cultivation of a loving mood, and but at the same time, they actually received this mercy from Lord Krishna that they were asked to directly perform some service. They didn't hesitate, and because of that, already having an understanding of Krishna, having cultivated that attraction to him, they immediately performed the service. So they're considered to have achieved a perfectional stage just by virtue of Krishna's kindness upon them. So, and there's a whole account of how their husbands view it, where they say, oh, our wives didn't have to undergo austerities, because remember, they're performing rituals. Our wives didn't have to undergo any austerities. They didn't have to do all this ritualistic worship, but they're in this position that they're actually have received the mercy of Lord Krishna. So Krishna understood on his part that those ladies had in fact abandoned all worldly hope and had simply come to see him. So they were in fact breaking some social convention at that particular moment, because their husbands tried to restrain them. Like, you've got something to do here, but nothing could stop them. So Krishna, he understood that they had simply come to see him. And in fact, that on a deeper level, they had understood that they were not going to be hoping for material happiness. They knew where their happiness was going to lie. So, and of course, to make a generalization, Krishna, he acknowledges that not only these Brahmana ladies, but all people who recognize their actual real self-interest, where their actual happiness lies, they take to the spiritual process of serving him, Lord Krishna, in a very loving mood. So it's to one's own benefit, even if it doesn't externally appear to be so. Because obviously sometimes, like in the case of these ladies, it appears that one's breaking convention. And the interesting thing is that in their particular circumstance, Lord Krishna encouraged them to return to the sacrificial arena, because he emphasized that their husbands were Brahmanas, so hence they needed their help to finish their sacrifices. So he encouraged the correct course of action on the external level as well. I mean, they had a certain duty that was required of them. And this is what Krishna tells them. I'm quoting from Srimad Bhagavatam. It is by hearing about me, seeing my deity form, meditating upon me, and chanting my names and glories that love for me develops, not by physical proximity. For this reason, he asked them to return home. So it can be an internal process. It doesn't require Krishna to be present. So, except of course the deity form is none different from Krishna. So it's assists the process of meditating upon Krishna and assists in chanting his names, and it assists seeing the deity form. So then there's the category of persons who are eternally perfect, going back to that category. Means they've achieved eternal blissful life exactly on the level of Lord Krishna. And they're actually able to attract Krishna by their transcendental loving service. So at this moment, the verses that we're reading today, one may pause and consider, what are the characteristics of bhakti? Because, that's the key ingredient, whether one is in the category of cultivating devotional service gradually, if one's in the category of already having reached the perfectional stage. It would be interesting to take a step back and look at what is actually the component of bhakti, this loving service that brings about such transformation. So this is what those characteristics are. Bhakti has the ability to destroy suffering, bestow auspiciousness, bring about disregard for being liberated, meaning from material suffering. It has a rarity of attainment, so very rare to attain it. And another characteristic is its manifestation of concentrated bliss and its ability to attract Krishna. So these are the qualities of bhakti. So in itself, just this loving service to Krishna has all these extraordinary characteristics built into it. And this is coming from, these characteristics of bhakti are coming from Srila Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, text is 1.117. So now these Nitya Siddhas, these devotees who are eternally perfect, they're exemplified by Vasudeva and Devaki. So remember, Srila Vishwanath's commenting that there's going to be a comparison that he's making between Vasudeva and Devaki and Nanda and Yasoda. So in terms of Vasudeva and Devaki, we hear the description that's given of their bhakti attracting Krishna, because that's one of the characteristics of bhakti. So they're carrying this loving devotion, this bhakti, and they attract Krishna. And the way that is described is, and I'm going to quote, this is coming from Krishna book, Srila Prabhupada writing, when Vasudeva was sustaining the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead within his heart, he appeared like the glowing sun, whose shining rays are always unbearable and scorching to the common man. The form of the Lord, situated in the pure unalloyed heart of Vasudeva, is not different from the original form of Krishna. So he was actually carrying the form of Krishna within his heart. So this is the nature of bhakti. He'd come to a point that he'd actually attracted Krishna, so Krishna was residing within his heart. That is how the nature of bhakti is, and one of its characteristics. It attracts Krishna, and this is how elevated Vasudeva was. Krishna was residing within his heart. So as an abode, he was using Vasudeva's heart as a living space. So this appearance of Krishna within the heart, as a result of bhakti and one's bhakti attracting Krishna on a very advanced level in bhakti, it's called Dharma, which means that it's not only Krishna's form that comes to reside in the heart, but his name resides in the heart, his qualities reside in the heart, and his paraphernalia. They all appear simultaneously. So it's not an abstract form, that's the point. It's Krishna in his entirety is residing within the heart of Vasudeva. And so Lord Krishna was attracted by the transcendental loving service of Vasudeva, in that he appeared within the heart of Vasudeva. And indeed, Krishna also, from the body of Vasudeva, he entered the body of Devaki. So there's a description that, from the mind of Vasudeva, Krishna entered the mind of Devaki. So, and from that kind of transferal, that was how Krishna came to appear in the prison house of Kamsa. It was not through the gross material way of appearing as a baby. So in fact, Krishna also took up residence within Devaki. And it means that when he took up residence in Devaki, all his expansions also took residence in Devaki. Because Krishna it's not just an abstract form, but him in his entirety. So it means that also all his incarnations took up residence in Devaki. So mention is made in Krishna's book that Lord Varahadev was present, Lord Nrsimha was present, because those are Krishna's expansions. So taking up residence in Devaki, those incarnations were also present within her. And Srila Vishwanath, he states that Uddhava comes to see the quantity and the quality of the love of Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj. So here's the second couple. The description is given that, and I'm quoting, as Mother Yashoda heard the description of her son's activities, she poured out her tears and milk flowed from her breasts out of love. So that was yesterday. There was a very lovely examination of that verse. So Srila Prabhupada states that these living entities are not conditioned souls. So it means they're not in the category of gradually cultivating devotional service. They're not ordinary living entities, but actually they're eternally liberated. So they remain in that position eternally. They're free from material suffering. It's not that because they're present on this earthly plane that now they're in the same category of persons who are having to gradually purify themselves and gradually, through their cultivation of bhakti, come to a stage of becoming free from material suffering, but rather they eternally free from material suffering, they eternally liberated. That's Srila Prabhupada specifically stating that in Nectar of Devotion. So this description of Mother Yashoda, it's in accord with the definition of bhakti, of having this characteristic of concentrated bliss. So this is so because Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says of Uddhava that he was joyful. That was our purport. We read that. Uddhava was joyful even in seeing this anguish of Mother Yashoda. So if tears are pouring, it was pointed out yesterday too, tears are pouring, she actually constantly keeps her eyes closed, not wanting to actually disturb her meditation on Lord Krishna, doesn't even want to look at anybody else. In fact, even she's not hearing people counseling her. She's so absorbed in her meditation. This state is actually her exhibiting one of those characteristics of bhakti, and that is that concentrated bliss. So what externally, as was pointed out yesterday, it appears from a material point of view great suffering, but in actual fact, because she's constantly meditating on Krishna, she's actually experiencing this state, this one of the characteristics of bhakti, concentrated bliss. So one would have to have, a transcendental understanding to be able to comprehend that what one is witnessing externally is not suffering, but is actually bliss, concentrated bliss. So Uddhava, he had this understanding that even this anguish is concentrated bliss. And he gives Uddhava's thought. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in commenting on this verse, now one of the things about Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he has insight into the heart of the various devotees. That's one of his extraordinary, should one say, abilities. So he gives the thought that actually Uddhava is having. So this is the thought that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti is recounting of Uddhava. Uddhava is thinking, now my life has become successful, having seen such love. So that bhakti is concentrated bliss is further elaborated by Srila Rupa Goswami. Again, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, I'm referring to volume 1. This is what he says. The bliss of Brahman realization accumulated by samadhi, lasting for half of Brahma's life, cannot compare to one drop of the ocean of happiness of bhakti. So this is a wild comparison. So I'm going to read the Sanskrit because I think it's a significant verse to try and understand this drop of bhakti in comparison to what Lord Brahma experienced. So this is the actual text from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu of Srila Rupa Goswami. Sandrananda Visheshatma Brahmananda Bhavet Esha Chet Parada Gunikrita Naiti Bhakti Sukham Bodha Paramanu Tulam Api. These days I'm hesitating so much in reading the Sanskrit because I'm typing something and my computer keeps trying to change things that have words that it's recognized from before. So I'm getting very nervous these days that something's been altered. Now, the highest perfectional stage of Brahman realization requires acting in a particular way. So now I'm going to examine carefully how it is that a drop of bhakti is considered way superior to Brahman realization. So, Brahman realization requires acting in a particular way. And that is engaging in one's occupational duty such that performing that duty is for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the Brahman stage is reached simply by renouncing the result of one's work or the satisfaction of Lord Krishna. And this is described in Bhagavad Gita 18:50. So it means that one becomes perfect in one's knowledge and reaches pure Krishna consciousness. And this is by the gradual development, very clearly spelt out by Lord Krishna. And this is how Lord Krishna puts it. Being purified by his intelligence and controlling the mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification, being free from attachment and hatred, one who lives in a secluded place, who eats little, who controls his body, mind, and power of speech, who is always in trance and who is detached, free from false ego, false strength, false pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things, free from false proprietorship, and peaceful. Such a person is certainly elevated to the position of self-realization. So it's quite an intense description of what it is that it means to actually come, what are the things that one is actually doing to come to this stage of pure Krishna consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada comments on this breakdown by Lord Krishna of what are those actions one's performing to come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness. And he explains that purifying intelligence, one becomes the controller of the mind. So this means through hearing. So we sitting in a Bhagavatam class and philosophical concepts are being explained. This is purifying the intelligence because one is actually getting knowledge that then allows one to use one's intelligence in the proper way. And if one's using the intelligence, automatically one's controlling the mind, because the mind may want to be doing all sorts of other things, but the intelligence controls the mind. So one becomes the controller of one's mind. And Srila Prabhupada explains that in a kind of trance-like state, and this trance-like state is once in that on the spiritual plane, where one's actually consciously doing everything for Lord Krishna. One isn't attached to the objects of sense gratification. So it means that one's mind may want to go to something that one may have found enjoyable, whatever it may be. I don't know, creating a collection of certain CDs or certain style of music, let's say, because that gave one pleasure. But one isn't attached to those objects. And in one's activities, one doesn't feel like a hatred, or I really don't like doing this, or I really love doing that. It's just one's, very even. One performs what one has to do in a very even frame of mind. And the reason this all becomes possible is because one isn't identifying so strongly with the body. Because if one's identifying with one's body, one's also identifying with the subtle body. So whatever the pushing of the mind is, one believes that's oneself. So one goes with it. But if one is controlling through purifying the intelligence through hearing and applying, then one is able to control the mind. And through controlling the mind, that equanimity of mind comes about, especially through persons coming to the intermediate stage that I described earlier on. And so then there isn't that sense of attachment or sense of hatred. It's, like wanting to hold on to something, or wanting to really reject something. There's a kind of equanimity of mind. And so one also doesn't have false pride. Because the reason one has pride is because one is holding on to something, or one is, made one's arrangement so that the things one doesn't like are not in that arrangement. So, and it's accompanied by a kind of satisfaction that everything that comes to one is actually being sent by Lord Krishna. So one cultivates that kind of mood. And one isn't angry when sense gratification isn't there. So if you're not getting what the mind wants, it's not that one is now like huff and puff about it. It's rather I've been given this by Lord Krishna. So you can see this is a concept that you form and hold in the mind. Not having pride. Remember, all of that, considering about the quality and quantity. Devotees, and particularly seeds. Bhakti is, and that control Bhakti. So, and this is what Uddhava is witnessing in Yasoda and Nanda. And he's considering that devotion that they're carrying, one drop of that surpasses this Brahman realization, that torturous description of becoming free of false ego, false pride, etc. And here, Uddhava is actually referring to Krishna as Narayan, because he's understanding that Nanda Maharaj appreciates Krishna's lordly quality. If there's any thought on the subject matter. Yeah, the question sort of, is there some shortcoming in having realization of Krishna within the heart, the Paramatma, coming to the stage of that Yasoda and Nanda Maharaj are exhibiting. So it's inbuilt, it's part of what they already have realized. So hence it's gone even further. So it's not just like, that was the description of Vasudeva and Devaki. They have Krishna within the heart, and all the qualities of Krishna within the heart, but there's a little distance in the love compared to the love of Yasoda and Nanda, which is like so concentrated, and it's like so highly personal. So it's not what would be the word, a disqualification, as part of I guess the development of that love. That's the best way I can put it. Yeah, that makes sense, because the material world has that duality. It's always this or that. So this is with a particular name. I find in myself, like when I see some pictures of wild animals, I immediately feel this kind of comfort. And the comfort is because I identify with the country that I come from, where there was a lot of wild animals. So, it has an effect on the mind that one even emotionally connects to certain elements that bring one comfort through familiarity. So I think there's always a tendency to look for comfort and safety, because the material world is so terrible and so much suffering. So even these identifications are ways to try and bring order or comfort. That's what I think. Yeah, it seems a kind of a sad thing when you think of the whole field littered with bodies, and that the subtle body has moved on from the physical body, but it's still carrying those designations. So inevitably there's going to be birth in the same situation. Yeah, gosh, yes, isn't that? That's an extraordinary thought. Thanks to Tendria.
Jitendra, you didn't have any any sound.
Oh dear.
No, we're hearing you, but people in the internet did. Yes. In the second verse, Uddhava tells Yashoda and Nanda that you're very fortunate because your son is the Supreme Lord Narayan. So, although he have, he's very tuned in, and he can understand, the exalted nature, and he's observing. One of the things that was clear in the previous verses, hearing them both, Nanda and Yashoda, that they didn't see Krishna as, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They see Krishna as their son. So in one sense, Uddhava is, informing them, no, actually, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which, possibly can disrupt that space that they have. Although, if lifting Govardhan Hill doesn't do it, or Krishna taking Nanda Maharaj to Goloka Vrindavan, in their same bodies with all the Brijavasis, doesn't do it, and all that, what telling them, will do. But still, it seems that, rather than Uddhava trying to enhance, their mood, in one sense is trying to, no, he's God, like that. So I found it a little.
It's an interesting thought because Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has seen that Uddhava is appreciating or understanding that Nanda Maharaj appreciates Krishna's lordly qualities. So hence he calls Krishna Narayan. So he's showing his sympathy for them through his recognizing what it is that Nanda Maharaj is relating to. But of course, anything one perceives is colored by one's own reality, inevitably. And Uddhava has a different kind of love for Krishna, coming from Dwarka. So he's seeing his life as having been now completely fulfilled because he's witnessed this different kind of love on the part of these two devotees. So his particular emphasis on I'm suggesting, I do not know, it was not directly stated, but one could infer that because he's marveling. He hasn't been exposed to such love, this concentrated bliss kind of love, that this bhakti that these two devotees are carrying is to him extraordinary, but he's connecting perhaps on what is he knows himself, the lordly qualities of Lord Krishna, and he's seen that Nanda Maharaj, just by referring to Krishna and Balaram as possibly these are two exalted demigods that have come here, Krishna's lordly qualities, and that's something he himself is carrying. So hence he's using the term Narayan, feeling that he's expressing his sympathy for their state of being self-observation. If there isn't anything else, thank you very much.